Hello and welcome to another Positivity Hack Delivered. Tonight we are going to be joined by three esteemed guests. My name is Beata Young. I'm the founder of Women on IT, and today's discussion is going to be how to change the ratio. So my guest, looking from my left, is Michelle Gialanze. She's the founder of Women Directors in Malta. Gunnar Stefansson, he's the professor at Iceland University, and Liane Giordades. Do I say it right? We met so many times.
Yes, thank you.
And she's a Women on IT task force member who actually was the one person that pushed me into, we need to do some event. And this is our chance and opportunity. So I thought, right, we've got this Women's History Month. We've got so many women with achievements. We can celebrate them not just on the 8th of March. And I thought, what could be better opportunity than discuss the impact of pandemic and discuss how we can change that than the last day of Women's History Day. So, Michelle, we'll start with you as a woman of many achievements, apart from Women Directors funding in 2016, as I recall. Right. I know that you changed and shifted your career quite recently, and now you're looking after your Misha Paintings website, as well as you're going globally with your paintings. And I am happy enough to have 3 of your paintings in my house. So could you please tell us a little bit why you think it is important to have more women on boards, and brief us into your work as Women Directors founder?
Okay, very similar to what you just said, Beata. First of all, thank you very much for having me on the show. Yeah, and hi to everybody. We are presently, Malta have a very low ratio of women directors. This hasn't been something that's just recent, it's been for a long time. So a few of the women that I know got together and said, we have to do something about this to make a change. Talking about directors, just directors at the moment, it's going to take a long time to change the culture, to be able to change the culture where women are given more directorship opportunities. This is not something that's going to happen overnight, Beata. So what can you do on an individual level if you're a woman listening to this and you aspire to become a director is definitely, join Women Directors, join Women on IT, join as many women networks, because one of the things that women don't do enough, in my humble opinion, is network.
That's a very good point. And that's an excellent point to segue into our excellent networker, Liane, because this is how we met before, Liane. You're a great networker, and I was giving your example as a woman who came out of nowhere, out of the blue, comes Liane, and she goes like a pinball everywhere around the room and speaks to almost everyone during Malta Business Network. And I was impressed. I have to say that I am kind of on the shy side of networking. So I wonder, how do you make it? How do you network with such a flourish?
Thank you, Beata. Thank you for having me, and hello to everyone on the call. Thank you for the compliment. For me, networking, I really enjoy it. And I think when you're entering into certain professions, I'm in the legal profession, you understand that there are certain statistics, certain perhaps underrepresentation, And so one thing that I learned quite early on is to make friends and to network. And if, for example, at an event, someone says to you, contact me, then do it. And so when I go to an event, I think to myself, I'm going to enjoy myself. I'm going to help myself to refreshments. People know me quite well. But also when I leave this event, I'm going to have made a contact with someone. And often it's quite easy to find people that you can speak to and that you have synergies with. On the other hand, sometimes you can go to an event and you perhaps feel as if you may be the only person representing your field, or you might feel that you're the only woman. But for me, you're there, you may as well enjoy yourself and leave with a contact. And I must say, in terms of my own career, finding out about opportunities, having conversations, making contacts, a lot of what I've achieved is down to networking. And that goes from law school, getting employment, and networking in groups such as these.
Excellent. So, Gunnar, I may ask you a tricky question. I believe that perception of communities in Iceland it's a rather kind of close communities. They are not really that focused on networking. What do you say to that? Is it a wrong perception? Is there a hint of truth, pinch of truth, or not really? You muted.
It's very difficult to judge your own society. You sort of live in it and you feel it's normal. But it's often said about Icelanders and the other Scandinavian countries that people have a hard time, getting into it, and that they see them as cold, isolated, harsh, and my Spanish colleagues, for example, in European networking or European research groups, they talk about the Scandinavians as being absolutely horrible. I mean, they're so blunt and brute force and just plain rude in the ears of the Spanish. Whereas we from the north, stereotypically, we tend to think that people from the south, they keep on talking forever and never get to the point. And both are stereotypes and both are sort of things you need to get around to. But there's a fair bit of networking here. I must say, though, that I suspect that Leanne has a much easier time of networking than I do, for example. I'm often at a conference and have a really hard time trying to find somebody to talk to. But I must say that I agree with the importance of networking, and some of my very best contacts in terms of research and cooperation comes from just having the audacity to sit down with somebody whom I've never met before or seen before. I just heard him give a talk, him or her, and to sit down with them and have a chat and say, I really like this your presentation, and what do you think about the following? Could this work, or could we work together on something?
Fantastic.
I've had up to 10 years of joint research just from taking that conversation, no matter how inconvenient it is at the outset.
Fantastic. Gunnar, I'll stay with you for a second, because we actually met at the conference and we were discussing it before joining the panel online today. And thank you very much for your words of appreciation. I see Rombit says that 5 minutes of PhD and she feels wiser already. Monica is joining us as well. It's lovely to see you, Monica. She's another great networker, actress, and she's a woman of many achievements. So, Gunnar, if I may ask you, because you're here to add a little bit of diversity on our panel, because I realize majority of my speakers are females today, but I was thinking about, what is that you see that women don't do, that there is a great opportunity they are missing, that they should do more often, whether it's networking, whether it's their career, whether it's their studies. So what do you think we could do better?
Okay, I'm not going to tell women in general what they should do better. That's definitely not my thing. But I can tell you something which we've noticed from research. We did a survey many years ago, or 5-10 years ago, in one of our secondary schools. We asked we got data from the headmaster, the principal, anonymous data on how the girls in the school had been, and the boys, had been selecting their classes. So this was just after they had finished everything, the years where everything was mandatory and they were about to choose what to do next. And it turned out that so what we were interested in was the science and technology subjects, just like many of you are. It turned out that a lot of the girls who got really high grades in mathematics did not choose mathematics again. Whereas the boys who would without hesitation choose mathematics even if they weren't that good at it. So right at that stage, you had the girls choosing themselves away from the science and technology subjects, even though they were perfectly capable of taking it. And we presented this at a teachers' conference in Iceland, and none of the teachers have actually noticed this. So they noticed the best students. So the very best girls and boys would go into science and technology. They didn't notice that the bulk of the girls who were perfectly, more than good enough in going into science, they didn't choose it. They went instead into social sciences or languages or other similar things. And so I think that's my main message. Don't underestimate yourself.
Excellent point, Gunnar. I think, Michelle, you as a mother of 2 daughters and son, you could also add to this, something. I believe that you've got some experience working on their hacking the future.
Yes, Beata, when I listened to the argument that I was just putting across, I have an education background. I have a PhD in IT and education. And when I was studying from my early days, I was reading data, sociological data on how to bring up kids while having my own kids. And I decided that I didn't want to differentiate between the boys and the girls. So I used to get the girls to play with toys that the boys traditionally played with from a very early age. And it made no difference to them, gender-wise, what toys they were just playing. And we stereotype our own kids in a way from a very early age with a certain behavior, and also the way that we don't encourage them to take on new practices. I always told my kids, you can try to do anything, and that was quite pivotal.
Excellent. Leanne, I was thinking about the moment that we were discussing the changes and we were discussing the impact of COVID. And you were hiding from us the fact that you just had a COVID baby delivered just last year. And the reason being was quite interesting, because you decided to hide it because...
Oh, that's the question. Okay. Well, I didn't choose to hide it per se. It was more a case of not wanting to be treated in a disadvantaged way for being a mother. And I own that. I am proud of being a mother. It's the most joyful thing ever. But when I was pregnant, I very much wanted to still be known as being a lawyer and the professional that I am. And so what I didn't want to happen is at events or where there are promotions or opportunities for people to think, well, oh, she's pregnant, so there's no point of thinking of her. There's no point of inviting her for the conversation. So for those reasons, and also at work, whilst I was happy if on a lunch break to speak about, how many months I have, for me, I very much wanted to do the job that I'm paid to do. And so that was my perspective then. And Some people might disagree with that. Some people might understand. But the reality is women are still underrepresented in certain fields, and there still exists lots of different reasons why that is. And for me, it's always been about one of the ways of overcoming potential discrimination is by being good for the job. So whatever someone might think of you or not think of you, if your work is good enough, then that will do the talking. And that's philosophy. So that was my philosophy then. In terms of that, I do probably mention it more now because when I'm on a work call or when I'm on a video call, often you'll hear my daughter make her opinions as well. But it was a decision that I made that I didn't want to be identified or stigmatized as being a mother and therefore not capable of doing my job or not able to have those conversations anymore.
Thank you, Leanne. That's a very interesting way of thinking. I would actually say from my personal background, I didn't hide it. Maybe there is, in fact, unconscious bias, which is showing that mothers are being perceived differently because there is always this threat of what if she goes on paternity leave, or what if she has to look after the daughter. Or recently in Poland we had a problem with my worker because she is looking after a baby and they had total lockdown, so all the schools were closed. So definitely that's the one side, but also as a mother I can show that I got great logistics ability, so I can maneuver things around my household much better because I've done it. So I know how to react to whatever situation brings. And I think that shows also with you, Michelle, because you raised a daughter who was prematurely born. And you had to deal with quite a lot of struggles, right?
Yes, definitely. I had 3 months in hospital and I was still at university. And my daughter, I spent 3 months there, and my lecturers, I mean, this is when you open up and you find wonderful people to support you. And I never found it, I never considered this. However, to just agree a little bit, otherwise it's not so good. One of the things I did experience was once in an interview, one of the interviewers asked me who was going to look after my children. And I was totally outraged by it, and at the risk of not getting the job, I asked him very politely back, I asked him, and who are looking after your kids while you are here? I got the job, but it's like, so what? So what? I have kids, I have my responsibilities, this is who I am. And that's what I bring to the table. I bring to the table this diversity. This diversity of being, this diversity of thought. And that's why your employees are mostly women or have responsibilities. And me knowing what it means actually adds to the company and to the bottom line. It actually has been proven that it adds profitability. That's another.
Fantastic. Great answer, Michelle. Thank you so much. Marianne Madera joined us and she's asking a question. Before we answer that, I would like to also ask you, Gunnar, because you're as a grandfather, as a father of a daughter and a son. Is that correct? Or
two boys, but
boys.
5 grandchildren, yes.
So was your perception as a academic? I know that academia usually don't have problems with hiring females, but I am wondering, and especially in Iceland, it's such a role model for other countries. I was wondering, how do you perceive if there is a woman, especially you have students who would come and say, I didn't do the assignment because I didn't have time because my daughter had a teething problem, for example.
Yeah, with students, it depends a little bit what stage they're in. I mean, if you're doing first year courses, for example, there may be hundreds of students, And it's very difficult to make allowances if a small project is due on every Monday, every week. Then usually what you simply do is you say, okay, we will skip 2 or 3 of these projects in grading and take out the lowest ones or the ones that didn't manage to do. So people usually try to take it into account in this way. But I've been extremely fortunate. I had 10 graduate students where I've been the advisor, and 5 of these have been women and 5 men. And quite honestly, it's been a tremendous experience to work with all these young people, and that is really the great benefit of working in academia, is all these young students. Now in COVID, of course, we all went to these using Zoom classes or Teams or whatever it was, and there you had to do a fair bit of tweaking to make sure that you didn't. That you made the students feel as comfortable as possible. So, for example, students were never in video themselves, ever. And the reason was simply that a lot of their home circumstances may be difficult, that they wouldn't want you to see it. So there were all sorts of things that came up. And it was certainly true that a lot of our female students, they had children at home, but equality is sufficient here that a large number of the men also would be taking care of the children. So this would be, not just the women. But when you say that we are fairly, advanced in terms of equality, that is true. But nonetheless, when I started at the university some 20 years ago, we still thought the same thing. We were fairly advanced, but the first report on gender equality, or one of the first reports, was taking the evaluations of new applicants for professorships or faculty in general. Mm-hmm. And it turned out that if it was a female applicant, different words were used to describe exactly the same qualities. Mm. I had never in my life imagined this would be possible. Mm. But it takes somebody to actually sit down and go through 100 reports, count the words and see what's being used to see the difference. Mm. And we're much more careful now. We read this over, these reports of ours, with exactly this in mind. Did we use the same words to describe the same thing for all applicants and so forth? But this is non-trivial. It's a bias which you have no idea that you have until somebody sits down and points it out to you.
Well, I think we had a discussion before on the PhD about how we need to train our brain. We need to exercise the patterns of our way of thinking, because it's so easy to think a certain way and never change this pattern. So indeed, bias is within us, and I am capable also of thinking, boys like to look at cars, girls don't, not so much so, because actually it was my husband who pointed that out when I suggested to a friend of mine that her son might like this car exhibition that is happening in Valletta, and my husband was like, what about the daughter? She might be interested as well. So we are thinking patterns. So definitely we need to sometimes rethink the way we perceive certain people. And I think it's a time for a question for Marianne. She's been waiting patiently here in the background. And I would like to address it to you, Liane, because I believe you're great at networking, and Marianne wanted to ask you how to approach someone that you have not reached out for more than 10 years. Knowing that you used to live in London, I'm sure you came across this challenge a couple of times.
Thank you, Beata, and what a great question. I think that this often happens. Time goes by really quickly, and you end up bumping into someone or seeing someone on social media that you haven't spoken to, and you think perhaps it's been 3 or 4 years, And then when you look at the timeline, you realise it's been 10, and then you feel embarrassed in terms of how am I going to make that contact. What I would normally do is I would wait for an opportunity. So perhaps an event where they may be attending or they may be interested in, or I would try to find something to relate to them. Perhaps they've moved to another country like I had. And I would just be really honest and say, hi, we haven't spoken for a while. How are you? I attended this event and I thought of you, or this may be of interest, but usually I wouldn't use it. I wouldn't be so embarrassed not to reach out, but I would put my hands up and say, sorry, it's been a while. How are you? Or is there anything I can help you with?
Great. Michelle, would you have anything to add to this?
Yes, it's often we are feeling embarrassed to approach somebody, but when we actually approach them, we realize that we've put this barrier on ourselves, actually. The other person is usually open. If they're willing to be open, they're going to be open. Whether you've approached them 5 minutes ago or 10 years ago. I mean, this is my opinion. This is like when you go into a room and you speak to someone, they're often feeling rather isolated as well. So reaching out to them is actually a good, always just do it.
Fantastic. Gunnar, I would have to say that when you mentioned that you feel a bit uncomfortable at conferences when there is so many people that you never met before, I was quite impressed with your networking skills when we first met. So what is your secret sauce when you approach people that you met 10 years ago or you never met before? How do you manage that stress of meeting somebody new? You're muted again.
I tend to not have any problem with people whom I haven't met before. So I'll just, contact them using social media, any which one, and say, hi, remember me? We met at, somewhere or other. I find it much more difficult to talk to somebody, from a cold start. I need to have an excuse for this. And if I listen to somebody give a presentation, I mean, that is an excellent excuse. You can always walk up to them and say, I found this very interesting, but how do you actually do this, or so forth?
I would also add to this that don't expect people to give you something. Quite often it's the case of what I can give and maybe I'll get something in exchange. So as my personal experience, thanks to networking, I was invited to be on the panel of Malta Board of Directors. So that definitely worked for me. And now I believe that we are, because of COVID, we have much more opportunity to talk to somebody we never met and give them something, whether it's a like on whatever post they posted, whether some comment on an article, but make sure it's genuine. Make sure that it's actually you spend some time to read the article. Because with the speed of internet and articles and span of attention that is less than 5 seconds, we need to sometimes stop and take a seat and think about how we can help and lift somebody up and do something for them. So I'm mindful of the fact that we are half an hour through the show. I'm very grateful for all the comments and questions, and if there is any other question, you've got this unique opportunity. Our esteemed guest panelists are from Malta, Michelle, Liane, also Malta recently, but used to live in UK, and we've got Gunnar, who's from Iceland. So you've got 3 different perspectives, plus the 4th one, which is the male gaze or male view, I would say. Would you say, Gunnar, you mentioned this research that shows that there is a difference and the bias in male versus female field and how we perceive our work. And there is also research that proves that women don't apply for jobs until they match 90% of requirements. So would you say, Gunnar, that you noticed that approach in your academia, or are we losing it when we enter the jobs market? Are we losing the confidence, I mean?
I think you're right. I think it starts earlier. I mean, these data that we gathered were from people at the age of 17. So that seemed to be where the problem started here. Before that time, everything was mandatory. They didn't have a choice of selecting. And at the age of 13, 14, the same interest was sort of given by both sexes in terms of what they were interested in. Everybody was very interested in science and technology, regardless of whether they were boys or girls. But something happened around the age of 17, give or take, and that's when the girls started selecting their way away from these science and technology subjects for whatever reason. The question of confidence, I think, is quite deep rooted. There's a terminology that's used in quite a bit, which is called the now I've lost it again. Oh God, it's a syndrome. It's called it's a syndrome where you think you're the only person in the room who doesn't have a clue what's going on.
Imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And I teach this to my students. Because everybody has this from time to time. You feel like everybody else knows what's going on, and you're the only one who doesn't. And my female students, they tell me, all of them, that this is a problem. And I don't know. I mean, this is not science, but it is very common also among the guys. But if you don't know something, then the classical thing that the teacher will tell you is that there's definitely somebody else in the room also who doesn't understand this, so ask the question.
Which reminds me a great story my husband told me some time ago. He had a meeting with a woman who's been appointed on the board of a derivatives market company. And she dared to ask a question: what really is a derivative? And the guy sitting next to her, he said, well, I have no idea, but they pay good money, so that's good enough. So Michelle, in terms of asking questions and having imposter syndrome, I think you've got some examples from your field. I mean, you're sitting on a couple of boards. You've got some experience sitting on boards. How does it feel being a woman surrounded, the only woman at the table? What can you do to really put your point across?
I thought for a second, Beata, you were going to ask me this question, because I always ask questions. So I'm well known for always asking questions. When I was actually sitting on the boards, I never noticed, I know this is going to sound terrible, but I never noticed the gender of who was sitting around the board, because as far as I'm concerned, it was just like, get this done, and this is what needs to be done, and what am I doing to understand it and understand the position we're in, and how can we make this company more profitable or get things done that it should, to progress. It wasn't so much like he's male and female and distinguishing between that. And I think that is a barrier when we start to think about the genders as well that's around the board. I mean, it's more about the skills that each individual get onto the board. I mean, what validity has that individual got, and what are they contributing to the board?
Fantastic. So, Michelle, before we ask Leanne about the board experience, I believe you have some. I would like to segue into Ernst is joining us tonight, and she's asking, and I think you're the woman of great achievements, Michelle, and I would address this question to you. How did you reach your level of success, given the sector's gender gap, especially in the technological department?
Well, it's to be honest with you, I put on blinkers like horses have sometimes, and I was very much goal driven. If you have a goal and this is what you want to achieve, you put blinkers on and you sort of not really paying attention to what others think and what others say about you, and you get on with what you have to do. That is success. You just have to get on with what you have to do.
Fantastic. Leanne, back to you. I wanted to ask you not only about, how did you reach your level of success, your level of confidence. I perceive you as a very confident young lady. I wish I could be as confident as you when I was at your age. So I wanted to ask you, how do you manage to make a career in Malta? Strange field, not many people you know. You mentioned networking. What else is a success factor in your career?
Thank you. Yes, just to touch on something that Michelle says, which I also agree with, is that being very goal driven. I think that's important. What I also will say as a kind of side point is that there are biases, and I think that the reality is you can use those to your benefit or not to your benefit. But I think it's important to be aware of what exists and who we are. We mentioned before about the pandemic and the impact it's had. And the reality is it's had, whether or not you agree with whether or not there exist biases, the reality is that women and other unrepresented groups have been disproportionately impacted. So I, for one, always believe in women adding value. I never kind of have any doubts about my value and what I bring to a company. But at the same time, there are biases with the pandemic, and we can say it as if it's the pandemic that caused these decisions, but decisions have been made which have meant that, for example, women are questioning whether or not they should leave their job, whether or not they should go, rather than going for a promotion, whether or not they should scale back. And if you look at, for example, the statistics around it, it's basically exacerbated the discrimination that exists. So what you have is, you have more women leaving the workforce for whatever reason, and you have decisions being made for redundancies and otherwise, and that's a statistic that exists in Malta, in the UK, and in America. So I think we need to be aware of those biases because they exist. It doesn't mean that I think there are opportunities, but I think that you need to sell yourself. You need to be strategic, you need to be positive, and you need to always show that you're going to add value. I, for one, would never go into an interview or an opportunity and say, well, I'm a woman, therefore. No, not at all. I welcome and I bring forward who I am as a person. I bring myself to work. But at the same time, in those pitches, you need to plan. When I go to a networking event, more often than not, I'll have a look who are going to be the attendees, what's the subject, do I have a question to ask, is there anyone in particular that I would like to meet? But in every opportunity I've had, coming to Malta, for example, I didn't have a network, and therefore I had to recreate the wheel, if you like. But my advice would be is to be a good salesperson. Sometimes we're good at speaking about others, but I think when it comes to having those conversations, be it at an interview stage or at a promotional level, you need to be able to sell yourself. And statistics show that, as you mentioned before, Vieta, for a man to apply for a job, they apply very easily. For the, women, we have to be super sure we reach the criteria. So that means we're not good representatives of ourselves. So we have to say to ourselves, well, actually, I'm going to give this a go. I'm going to make that application. I may not meet the criteria 100%, but I'm going to go for it. I'm going to ask. Another statistic is women very rarely ask for a pay rise. We very rarely speak to what happened. We're left in charge of the office when the boss goes away, and all sorts of dramas happen. And when our boss returns on Monday and they ask us, well, how was it? We say, oh, yes, it was fine. Whereas our male counterpart will say, oh, this happened and this happened, but I saved the day. So I think we have to be good salespeople. We have to put ourselves forward, and we have to continuously be goal-led and milestone-driven. And I think being an in-house lawyer, It isn't just about being a lawyer, it's about being a project manager sometimes, but being very strategic in terms of your own career progression, as well as what you need to achieve at work. It's not good enough just to be in the office. You need to, as Michelle was saying, you need to be goal driven.
Fantastic, Leanne. I think you're summarizing so well for me. I feel almost like we still got 20 minutes, but we could as well just finish this topic. But I think I would like us to think about, because we are talking about how bad it is for us, how privileged some certain societies are, or gender bias exists. And I am thinking about what you've achieved, Gunnar, where you went in Kenya. You went to prisons to bring education in a suitcase. You went to Africa and you've been preaching to them to progress in terms of career, in terms of education. So when I think about, how bad it is for us when we've got the odd power outage and what it is like in other parts of the world, I think we are pretty well advanced. What do you say to that, Gunnar?
Well, yes, the difficulties are a complete, a different order of magnitude when you go to a place like Kenya. And like you said, we once contacted somebody who was working in a prison facility and decided to set up a joint project with them and see if we could bring educational technology into the prison itself. So we stood there outside the maximum security prison, having never been there before, and knocked on an enormous big door and had no idea what was on the other side. And came in and met these prisoners who were in a secondary school, which was inside the prison, and everything is different. Everything is completely different from anything you would ever have imagined before. Of course, I mean, those people are locked up, and since it's a maximum security prison, they're all there for a crime which is basically life in prison. And that's one thing. But I'd like to emphasize more, or give more rather as an example what we're doing right now, because we're working in the slums of Nairobi, where we've been in touch with several libraries. And the issues that you hear about and end up running into is things like it's a major problem for girls in the slums to get sanitary pads. This is something you would never think of as a problem in Europe. But it's something that keeps them away from studying. So one of the things we came up with was using our blockchain technology to actually pay them a minimal universal basic income so they could buy sanitary pads from the library. So it's just a tiny little thing.
Fantastic. Great example, which reminds me the discussion I heard a couple of years back. It was actually a podcast about startups done in prisons, because it turned out that their idea of technology was 20 years old, and they were thinking about advancing the things that they remembered. So in terms of what is our perspective, what is our opportunity, I think we are pretty well advanced. We can use networking skills, we can develop them, as Leanne said, reach out to people, and it's so much easier nowadays with access to technology, with LinkedIn, Facebook. So when we are talking about tools, what would you say is the greatest tool and great potential for reaching out to people? I know, Michelle, you are very active on Instagram. What would you say, what is your ideal medium for reaching out to your clients or to your colleagues?
Okay, I think each social media has its own audience, as you know, Beat. I mean, but I was just listening to Gunnar, and it's often, I was thinking about the hidden poverty among women as well that exists. So there are a lot of barriers for women, which might, women who have divorced, separated, ended up with children, have no income. So there are loads of barriers. to reach out. Depends what you want to do. So if you want to help, I am now have finally become full-time artist, and as you said, and one of the things I would like to do is I'd like to reach out to the community and do an art project on diversity. Now, depending on who my target audience would be, if it's the kids, then I would go to a school. I mean, not necessarily social media, if I have to be honest, because not everybody has access to those tools.
Yeah, that's a vital point. Leanne, I know that you're not active on Facebook. For some reason, you decided to keep that privacy to yourself, and you're quite active on LinkedIn. What would you say is your favorite tool when you are networking nowadays? Because with COVID, it's very difficult to have any meetings, right?
Yes, I think you've made a distinguishment between Facebook and LinkedIn. And I think, as Michelle says, every social media has its own audience. And for me, in the purposes of networking, I've always found LinkedIn to be a great tool. I think now, knowing the different webinars that are happening, that's really useful, and it creates good accessibility. I think when you look at sometimes some of the disadvantages, perhaps mobility disadvantages or time disadvantages that you might have, one of the plus things of the pandemic is that because a lot of the webinars are now online, you have an opportunity to be able to multitask. And that's something that I found incredibly useful, especially being pregnant and a new mother. So I feel that actually, if physical attendance was required, I probably wouldn't have made half of the events that I've attended. So for me, it's probably being able to attend events from home. On the other hand, I enjoy making the connections and seeing people's interests and people's thinking. I think being a successful lawyer is being able to navigate cross-functionally. So I might know one part of the puzzle. I might understand the legal perspective or the compliance perspective, but someone else will understand the business perspective or the marketing perspective. And I think LinkedIn gives you an opportunity to see things from a different perspective, which I think is incredibly important.
I believe that LinkedIn's got a great professional outcomes. So definitely I would recommend our Women on It followers to up their game and work on their profiles. I know that Charlotte was trying to ask a question. Unfortunately, she lost half of it. So it was an important point about recognizing the gender in the room, etc. I would like to bring an example of my meeting, one of the meetings in the boardroom, one of the first meeting when I was introduced, and I was the only woman, and I decided that I am not going to behave like a typical mother woman of the household. I am not going to make coffee, and I refuse to offer to make notes, because I heard about the problem of women taking notes. Once they start taking notes, they are not part of the discussion. That's one of the statistics, one of the research that shows that we need to have a seat at the table and listen and participate. And there is another outcome, and maybe Michelle, you from your experience could give us some examples what it's like in Malta. But apparently you need at least 3 women to make a difference, because quite often if there is just 2 women, one will be mixed with the other. Quite often men call women different names because they can't really focus on the topics they bring. Or if there is one woman, that's usually not her idea, that will be whichever man repeated the idea, it's going to be his idea. So what's your experience? Have you been part of the board that is consisting of more than one woman?
Beata, traditionally in Malta, the boards are mostly men. And even when I was chairperson of a board, I mean, where you don't get an option who to get onto the board, they're all men. So one of the things, though, I can share here is your voice on the board as a woman. the men seem to gazump it. You find it difficult sometimes to put your point across. And then if you shout, it's not accepted. If you interrupt, it's not accepted. So how do you put your voice across? That's quite a relevant question for me. One, I can share with you one board, which they were like 3 or 4 people. They finished the discussion. All of a sudden, the board meeting is finished, and I had points to make.
Uh-huh.
How I tackled it by actually sending an email outlining all my points that I had wanted to make in the meeting, and to say, to me, these are important points that should be included in the forthcoming meeting. So it's about being yourself, not being pushy. It's a very fine balance how to behave on a board when you're the only woman. While if there's more than one woman, there's an ability to have your voice heard more, definitely.
Fantastic. Gunnar, given your experience in Africa, and I think you've got a kind of broad view on how women and female kind of problems are overall perceived, what would you say is how to tackle this challenge of not being too pushy and still putting your point across? What would you say is the best approach in a room filled with men?
Good question. See, when I started in academia, that was only about 20 years ago, and there were only men in the math department, and I was 40 when I joined, and I was the youngest new faculty member. And if anybody came up with a new idea, somebody else would ridicule it. But we're lucky enough now that we have a lot of young faculty, faculty in their early 30s, or in their 30s, and they have lots of new ideas. And whenever they come up with an idea, we the older guys, the old ones are old guys, the older guys, we all say, how can we make this happen? And this is just a change in our group. And it doesn't have anything to do with gender. Some of the young faculty now are finally female. And as far as I can tell, we listen to every single one of the young faculty members. We take them very seriously. But I was thinking back on I've been on several boards of companies also, and I cannot remember a single one where there was more than one female. But in those cases, we all had the same say in matters. If somebody opened their mouth to say something, then they were listening to that. So that was not an issue. The issue was more the lack of representation.
Fantastic.
And I think that's very important. You mentioned it before, the issue of a diverse workplace, and that is very, very important. That it's something that some of us, old guys like me, have only begun to realize fairly recently, that it's not just a question of having equal representation of genders. It's all these different points of view that all of us have that need to be represented in both boards and academia and different places.
Fantastic. Liane, I believe you read quite a lot on diversity of age, religion, views. So I wanted to listen to your experience. What do you see? What has changed since you came to Malta? Because I think you, being raised in London, it's quite a different perspective, seeing what it's like in Malta, right?
Yes, I think so. I think in terms of, I think things have opened up and become more inclusive since I first came to Malta. I think over the year, I think with COVID, where information is presented to us and we have an opportunity to pay attention rather than just say, oh yes, unconscious bias, what's that? What difference does it make of representation? So I think there are more conversations happening now around diversity and inclusion and on representation. I think it's very important. If you think about the question in terms of being on a board and what you need to do, then at the very least, you need to be a good representative of yourself, of the company, and of the shareholder. And when you're making a point, you need to come to the table with a purpose. So when you're speaking, you're saying something because you have researched the point, so you can back up what you're saying, and you're adding value, coming up with solutions. But the thing I bear in mind is being a representative. So I know that where my expertise is, and if I speak on a committee or on a board, there are other people, I recognise that they have different levels of expertise, and my job is to use my legal expertise to ask questions and come up with solutions that meet that end. And I think that you need to be aware of the lack of diversity. At the same time, I think it's really important that you add value. And if people do have certain discriminatory views or questions or misunderstandings, that you be a good representative of yourself as well. Because if you change yourself or feel that I'm not worthy or I'm not valuable, then you lose your identity. So there's a balance there. But my view is be a good representative, and also we all have an obligation if we're working in fields where we're working in the arts or we're working in science or in those stereotypically underrepresented groups, we all have the obligation not only to be a representative, but to be a role model to others and to make ourselves available for mentoring and at networking events, being open-minded if someone comes to speak to you. So that would be my kind of final thoughts on this: being a good representative and do not be afraid to think of yourself as a role model.
Fantastic. It's been a pleasure to have you, everyone, as a guest. I'm mindful of the fact we've got 2 minutes left, so I will run through a quick question. What would you say, and it's to everyone on our panel today, what would you say are 3 simple steps to make sure that you are going to come out of pandemic stronger, maybe with a new career or sitting on a board? Michelle, let's start from you. What would you say are 3 simple steps that would progress your career? And you can talk about your examples or what you see around you.
Okay. Obviously, it's much easier to talk about my example with art. Now, in the pandemic, art has been badly hit, and there have been some new developments. So what am I doing to prepare myself? And what I would recommend is you research, continuous reading of what's happening in your field, network as much as you can on Zoom, and get prepared, because as soon as this period of time is over, I don't know where we're going to land, but you need to be in prime pole position for change and allow yourself the ability to make mistakes and to learn from them.
Fantastic. Leanne, 3 tips?
Okay, so I would say that you need to think of yourself as a representative, think about where you can have influence, try to be a part of the decision making. So rather than being in a situation where when we come out of the pandemic, decisions are being made on policies about remote working and representation, try to find a way of being part of that decision-making process through networking, through making connections, through joining certain groups. Number 2, I would say, is continuously upskilling. Whatever your area of expertise is, upskill, find out something new, find out about a company you might be interested in, find out about the skills that you may need, or transferable skills in most cases that you're going to need to take you forward in your ambitions. And number 3, I would say, is continuously be goal-driven, be strategic in what you want to achieve and stick to it. Be agile enough to listen to feedback, to change slightly how you're going to get to the end. But even in the pandemic, it's so important that we remain goal-driven. There has been obviously so many statistics that speak to the disproportionate impact on women, undoing many years of such great work. So we all have a responsibility to ensure that we continue to break the glass ceiling.
Fantastic. And finally, last but not least important, Gunnar.
Thank you. I think the important thing is to keep believing in yourself, and secondly, to try to see the opportunities in life. And COVID certainly does also bring opportunities. It brings a lot of misery, but there are also opportunities. We learned in our African example that we couldn't go to the schools anymore. We couldn't help the children in the schools, but there were community libraries. So we went to community libraries instead and started giving the community libraries educational technologies and found new ways so that the students could earn their own tablet computers, and it has proven to be a much better system than we had before. So there are all sorts of little opportunities which even come with this ghastly pandemic.
Fantastic. Gunnar, thank you very much. We'll be speaking to you on the 14th of April. Another PhD Positivity Hack Delivered is coming to you on Wednesday, 6 o'clock. I hope everyone is going to have a lovely Easter. I would like to thank you, Michelle Gialanze, Liane Georgiades, and Gunnar Stefansson for excellent points. I would like to add, it's very important to network, very important to be goal-driven. So I echo whatever our lovely panelists said tonight. And I would like to thank those of you who watched our show, who joined us. Thank you, Rombit. Thank you, Agata Belon, Monika Jarusińska, Marianne Madera, Elze, and Charlotte Wandendea. Lovely to speak to you. I look forward. I want you to succeed, and I look forward to meet you on the 14th of April for another positivity hack delivered by Women on IT. Thank you.
Thank you, Beata.
Thank you, Beata. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.